Are not clear. Okay, let's, Jamie, you want to take the roll, please?
That's Penny Burstead.
Here.
Chris Freeman.
Here.
Tanya Huseby.
Here.
Clint Moses.
Here.
Leonardo Swanson.
Here.
Charlie Schneider.
Here.
Dave Steyer.
Here.
Jim Swanson.
Here.
Tricia Thompson.
Here.
We have quorum. Please stand for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
School district of the Menomonie area, by embracing the unique needs and using the strengths of our diverse community, is dedicated to preparing all students to become lifelong learners, caring individuals, and responsible citizens. Move on to item 1B, agenda order approval and revision. Do we have any changes? Okay, move on to item E. We have no recommendations and accommodations for tonight. Community communications, we have nothing more than what was posted in board docs this afternoon. Anybody else that's received anything? Okay. Board member, superintendent, communications. Anything from the board? Amy?
I attended two OSFI events. One was on race and equity, which was very good. It was free and it was recorded, so if anybody wants to go back and watch it, they can. Basically, it was an overview, and then OSFI is a task force committed to equity and anti-racism. And it happens to be headed by somebody named Tom Weber, who is the vice president of the Sun Prairie School District, who I know very well from working with him in the Paul Ira School District dissolution process. And so that was really, really good. Sun Prairie and Brown Deer are doing wonderful things, and they shared what they're doing around anti-racism issues. And then the second thing I attended was Certainty in an Uncertain World, about planning and opening of schools. And it had a lot of good information about how we need to sometimes take a deep breath, step back, and not get so crazy about urgency and fast and furious, but to try to, take things as they come and kind of go with the flow. And that was really good too. So I just want to share those things. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Anybody else? Chris?
I was trying to find an email from a community member. Is it okay if I just give you a quick report on an email I got from Margaret Brush? It's regarding a letter that we were considering regarding the use of vouchers. So I thought it was pertinent.
You had asked, you sent me a letter today requesting that to be on the agenda for next meeting, right? Is it okay if you just address it then?
Yeah, we can do that.
If you don't mind.
No.
Thanks, Chris. Anybody else? Joe?
Okay, after the last board meeting, we were able to have another meeting of our planning team. We reviewed the reopening plans again. We also had a question and answer session for families and another session for staff. So we've had a lot of communication about our reopening plans and appreciate everyone's work and input on it. I think it's a real challenge for all school districts, but I'm very proud of the work that's been done in Menomonie. I'd also like to thank the Chamber of Commerce for hosting a community forum last week. That was a really nice opportunity to collaborate with Chancellor Stowe, the president at CVTC, and then our local community in terms of trying to share what plans are for reopening. That's all I have tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Move on to revenue expenditure reports for the month ending end of July 2020.
Leah was not able to join us tonight, but one thing she wanted to point out is with summer school being nowhere near what it typically is in our school district, you can see that reflected in some of the revenue and expenditure reports. But that's really the only thing she mentioned today.
Any board members have any questions? Charlie?
Joe, when we were going through the budget a couple of months ago, you had put a proxy number in for that because you didn't have any idea at that point how many people were going to sign up for summer school. Remember, that was a fairly low number. Did the number that actually signed up exceed what you would put in? or was it less than that?
The final summer school FTE count, I believe, goes into the state in October, so we'll have a report to share with the board before that time.
Any other questions? Okay, monthly employment report. Any questions on that? We have some resignations, a couple new hires and a transfer. Okay. Move on to the consent agenda. I'll ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda. So moved. Penny, is a motion.
Second.
Amy for the second. Any questions on that? Okay, Jane, let's go. It said that we had three resignations, 2 new hires, and a transfer. Oh, my, consent.
You're ahead of yourself.
Ah, I was behind actually, I was in the monthly employment report. Sorry. This one contains the minutes from our July 13th and 27th board meeting, our special board, regular meeting on the 13th, the special meeting on the 27th. Financial reports, donations, we had 2 of those exceeding $1,000, $3,700 to Oaklawn for playground equipment from the Oaklawn PTO, $1,000 to the MS high school football from the Green Bay Packers. And then, that was it. So I apologize for not saying that first. The motion does carry 9-0. Personnel consent agenda. On that, we have 6 new hires. Anything you want to say about that, Joe?
Just that we appreciate the support that the board has provided to provide additional teaching staff to help us get through this challenging year.
5 of these are emergency one-year positions. The 6th one is a school counselor at Downsville.
Correct.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second, Jim? Any questions?
Just a quick one, this might be a question for Sam. How was the pool? I mean, how many, do we have quite a few candidates for these positions? Has it been easy? Has it been a challenge? What would you expect, I guess?
Yeah, I'll answer since Sam's on the microphone. We did have a very good pool. We posted for 20 positions. We ended up with almost 50 applicants. We did tons of interviews trying to sort through and make sure we hired the best possible candidates. In fact, we're still in that process, but we feel that definitely helps us get ready for the start of the school year.
Any other questions? Okay, Dean, let's go. Motion carries 9-0. Okay, we'll move on to the action agenda. Item 4A, approve SBMA reopening plan for 2020, 2021. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion.
Penny, is there a second?
I'll second.
Charlie? Joe?
Well, I want to make sure people understand that, first of all, this was a very collaborative process. I think we went through that in detail many times. And again, I appreciate all the work that so many people in our school district provided. Also, the collaboration we had with our families, a lot of great questions, a lot of great suggestions. And all of that was considered when trying to develop a reopening plan. I think it's also important to note that this plan, even though we're asking for your approval tonight, will continue to be changed, will continue to be added to. Just today, you can see there, I listed there in board docs, I think there's like 10 or 11 items there that the Department of Health Services is working on in terms of communications, in terms of direction. So as things continue to change, we're gonna have to be mobile, and we plan to do that. But we're at the point now, being August 10th, we have to have direction. The board did a great job setting a vision at the beginning of the summer, and we took that vision, and I think we have a plan that provides choice, it provides flexibility, and it provides mobility so that as the pandemic continues to change in our society, in our community, we will be able to change with it. So thank you again, everyone who put their time into this plan.
Okay, questions?
You know how many, so far, I know Wednesday's the deadline, but have you got an idea of how many percentage of people have just chosen online?
Yeah, I think it's going to be close to 400 students. We are going to have an orientation for families. I still think there's some misunderstanding. I think some families think that the full virtual program is going to be teachers across the computer screen. The full virtual program is an online program. We will have teachers help facilitate that and measure the progress that the students are making. But we want to make sure people are very clear on understanding what that program is like. But I do anticipate it to be, somewhere between 10 and 15% of our students.
And just to follow up on that, will that mean that we'll be able to get the 6 feet then in the classes if we have that many students that are not in school, in the classroom, in the building?
Well, whether or not we have the online program, we are anticipating 6 feet for all grade levels, kindergarten through 6th grade. Grade 7 through 12th grade, we're hoping to have 6 feet in many of our classrooms. That's where a certain amount of online enrollment will help. But if we need the 6 feet, if that becomes a requirement, then we'll still probably have to look at that blended learning model where we do half enrollment.
Okay, and then one more thing, sorry.
No, you're fine.
One more thing, some people in the community still think that just because of the plan, and I can see where the parents might not think it's clear, but there's some people out there that still think that that there's a 50%, like there's 2 cohorts for 7 through 12, for 2 days a week, every other Friday. And I know it's 5 days a week, and so I try to tell everybody that, but I just wanted to make sure that if you have any questions about that, there's some people I know that are still confused. I think we sent all the communication out, but somewhere along the way, some people think that's still what's out there.
Well, I think some people are wondering why we're not starting in a blended model. And I think the weekly emails we're sending out that describe the threshold and talks about the numbers in Dunn County are helpful. But yeah, some people I don't think are reading the emails or perhaps aren't getting them. But we will continue to follow the health department's advice in terms of what mitigation measures are necessary. Like also Eau Claire's plan is an alternating enrollment plan, so I think some people may have seen the news on that. There hasn't been as much coverage of our plan in the news. I do have an interview scheduled next week with Bob Gallagher, and hopefully that'll help to share some of that. But between what we did with the Chamber of Commerce, between all the Q&A sessions we've had, between the board meeting discussions, I think most people have a pretty clear understanding.
Jim was first and then.
Oh, okay, so my concern is with the 4-foot social distance at the high school and middle school. There's absolutely nothing in the CDC or anything out there that says that's acceptable and safe. It's all 6 foot and a mask, and check your ventilation because of aerosol spread. So I really think that needs to be changed. I know it's gonna change the plan and screw it up, but it's not putting safety first, trying to have a 4-foot thing. It's just not in the science, it's not there. After you came up with it last week, last meeting, I'm like, where did that come from? And I spent a lot of time researching it, a lot of time talking to other medical people, and it just simply is not a safe alternative.
Well, thanks for sharing your opinion on that, Jim.
It's not an opinion, it's a scientific fact.
Okay. Anyway, thanks for sharing that scientific fact. We said from the start that for the full enrollment plan, the 6 feet of physical distancing would be emphasized but not required. And nothing's changed with that over the past 6 weeks, at least 6 weeks. So again, I appreciate your comments, but there are other guidelines out there that suggest that any distancing is a continuum. 3 feet is kind of the bare minimum of what I've seen. 6 feet is better, 9 feet is better than 6. We went through this last board meeting.
Right, yeah, I'm
12
just
feet is
saying.
better than 9,
But
so.
you asked me, so well, what should we do? I said, follow the CDC. CDC is 6 feet and a mask. And 3 feet or 4 feet, it's not safe. It's not following the best science out there. And we need to follow the best science.
Well, CDC also talks about the risk of kids not being in school. And I think that's something that needs to be considered when we're looking at this plan.
I'm not
You know,
saying don't
Jim,
put kids
please
in.
don't.
No, I won't. I'm not gonna let him distort and,
No,
yes,
Jim.
he is not going to lie about what I'm saying.
He's not
gonna distort.
lying.
He's
Jim.
deflecting.
you're out of order.
Fuck you. I'm sitting here and fucking dictator now.
Whoa.
That's bullshit.
Motion going to closed session.
Yes.
Somebody?
I'll make the motion to go into closed session right now.
We have a motion.
You got a problem, it's not on the
Jamie?
agenda.
Stop.
It's not on the agenda.
Jamie, take the roll. Okay. We're gonna take a 15-minute adjournment of the meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Stand adjourned for 15 minutes. call the meeting back to order. Jeannie, would you take the roll here?
Penny Brewster.
Here.
Chris Freeman.
Here.
Tanya Houston.
Here.
Chuck Nolan.
Here.
Mary Swanson.
Here.
George Snyder.
Here.
Chris Starr.
Here.
Richard Johnson.
Here,
Richard Lawler.
Here.
All the board members are present, we have quorum to conduct business. We make a statement, Jim, you need to control your own purse. Do you feel you can do that the remainder of the meeting?
if you can.
If you can't, if you do something like what you just did, we have no choice, call the authorities.
Ooh, I'm scared. I'll move on with the meeting.
You understand?
Move on with the meeting.
I'll take that as a yes. Okay, discussion on approval of SDMA reopening plan. We have a motion and a second. Kenny, I believe if you can still remember what you were talking about.
Oh, my question was, I was just curious to see what the, kind of the breakdown, and maybe you don't have the numbers, Joe, but, and it's not super relevant, but I'm just curious to see, as far as the virtual school, what the breakdown is between elementary, middle, and high school.
Sure, and we'd be happy to provide the board with the exact numbers after the registration, but it's pretty well dispersed across the board.
Okay.
And Tony or Sam or Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was about 200 students K-5, about 80 students 6 through 8 middle school, and then the rest were high school.
And I don't need exact numbers, I was just interested to see kind of how that was falling into place.
Jim?
So how has WVS beefed up their program? Can we get everyone in? Are we gonna run into enrollment caps? How's that gonna work?
We have run into some enrollment caps. Our director of technology, Katie Krieger, has done a great job working through that. We did have some students that were originally on a wait list. Those all got approved either yesterday or today. So if people still sign up between today and Wednesday, we could have some issue with some wait caps. I do know WVS is trying to hire some additional teachers. But we're confident that we'll be able to find a solution for all of our students.
Just if they can't get to, they wanna do virtual, how will we provide education for them?
I think we can work with WVS and provide a virtual opportunity.
Tricia?
So there's so much information here, but the one thing I was just wondering about is in regards to transitions between like classrooms and bathrooms, classrooms and lunch and stuff like that. Is there some sort of a sketched out plan of how that's gonna happen so that kids aren't like, mass amounts of spaces, like especially the elementary ages when I'm thinking.
Yeah, those kind of specifics will be more detailed in the building level plans,
Okay.
which the building level principals have been working hard on.
Okay.
We're having an administrative retreat on Wednesday, so the first step is getting the district's overall plan approved, and then those more detailed plans will be shared at the building level. A lot of the work has already been done, Tricia, but there's a lot more that needs to be done with our retreat on Wednesday. I do know that our principals and our staff members are already considering ways that they can handle those transitions and try to promote the distancing and such as much as possible.
Chris?
And I'm just trying to piece this together from what you said at the last meeting. I think you said that we had 2 facilitators for the students that were gonna be doing the virtual school. Is that gonna have to change since there was more people signing up for that option than we expected? And then how are we gonna fill those staffing positions from the people that we're doing for emergency hire? Or are we gonna allow more people that are already hired in the district to hop onto those facilitator positions?
We talked a lot about that today, Chris, and again, a lot of it will come down to once we finalize the enrollment numbers. We know that at the elementary level, since we're providing the facilitators, the teachers of record, we are going to have to increase our teaching staff for the virtual program at the elementary level. Now, depending on the distribution of those students, we may be able to reallocate some of our in-person instructors to provide that virtual instruction oversight. but we still need to do an analysis of exactly where those students are coming from. So that's a big part of what we're gonna do Wednesday as well, is we're gonna start determining, for instance, at River Heights, if River Heights had X number of elementary students, at what grade levels are they at? And then does that allow for us to maybe not need an extra in-person instructor at that grade level and perhaps reallocate that FTE towards the virtual program? We also have talked about that we do have some staff members that would prefer to do the virtual programming. So it wouldn't necessarily be the person, the extra teacher who was hired that would do the virtual. We would work with our staff members to try to work together and make a best fit for everyone.
Chris?
Just as a follow-up, is there, like an ideal number that it would be suited for, like, how many students one facilitator could reasonably be expected to, because at the beginning it's gonna be hard, right?
Right.
Because just getting them up to speed and getting parents down, sitting down with their kids and making sure they're going through, there's gonna be a lot of questions and probably problematics in the beginning. Is there like any sense of like, what you think you need per student?
Well, WVS is recommending around 30 students per facilitator. And it's important that people understand that being a facilitator is a lot different than being a teacher. The curriculum is delivered online and the curriculum is already set up in the virtual program. But the facilitator plays a very important role in terms of tracking progress, reaching out to the students. So what my understanding, Chris, is that really 30 students per facilitator is the target we should be shooting for.
So we're gonna need a lot of facilitators.
Well, yes and no. At the 6th through 12th grade level, the facilitators are part of our VS programming. At the K-5 level, we're the school district providing those teacher facilitators. Great questions. Anybody else?
No further questions? Okay, let's vote.
Just one more thing. I would feel better if we could make the 4 feet, 6 feet. I'd still say yes, but I just think that's really important.
Thank you.
Okay, Jan? Motion passes 8-1. Action item 4B, approve policy 113, non-discrimination in district programs, activities, and operations. Is there a motion to approve? Penny, is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Dave, these are the policies that Samantha Hyder, Director of HR, worked through. The board reviewed these policies, well, the policy and then the corresponding rules and exhibit at the last meeting. There have been no changes. It's very well aligned with the recommendations from the School Board Association. The regulations do take effect on August 14th.
Any questions? Okay, Jamie, let's vote. Motion carries 9-0. Action item 4C, approve COVID advocacy letter. Is there a motion to approve? Jim, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Tricia? Any discussion? Amy, anything you'd like to add?
Amy, do you mind if I just mention something quickly before you? Is that okay, Amy?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you mind if I mention something quickly?
Sure, go ahead.
At the last meeting when the board went through this, I was going through my notes this afternoon. It said beef up the part about broadband a little bit. So late this afternoon, I just changed that a little bit about more clearly stating that it was a big problem for many people in our school district. The fact that our broadband is not robust and reliable across much of our community.
Amy?
Okay, I really don't have anything to say, I think it's good. Where is that paragraph that you changed or picked up?
That's the second paragraph.
Okay. That looks good, looks good. I have no, so
Thank you.
thank you for helping get that ready.
You're welcome.
Any other discussion?
Okay, Jamie, let's go. Motion carries 9-0. Moving on to discussion items, policy review. Start with 5A COVID-19 report. Joe?
So the board is getting used to this now, but just to give you an update on where things are at in our community. As of today, there are 126 confirmed cases of COVID. 105 of those cases have been released from quarantine. So that's 21 active cases. That's slightly down than what it had been over the past couple of weeks, which is good news. The activity level in Dunn County is still high. However, the burden level had dropped to moderately high, and the trend is still horizontal. As you've seen from the emails that I've sent to families, if that burden level was to go to high, or more than 100 cases per 100,000 people in our county, and the trend was increasing, then we would be in a situation where additional mitigation measures would be recommended by the health department. The Badger Bounce Back Plan, still only 3 of 6 indicators are hit at this point. We still have the guidance on gatherings in Dunn County of 25 people for indoor, 50 for outdoor. And then the big change is the governor's order for requiring face coverings in public until September 28th. We plan to comply with that order here in the school district of the Menomonie area. Summer school was very limited in August, just some real specialized programming. Programming was limited to the inability to staff some of the courses that were hoped to be offered. Student activities, we did have a number of student activities this summer, and I'm happy to report that it appears the mitigation measures that were put in place were very effective. Those activities went on without incident. And then the free meals for kids program is continuing. That's scheduled to continue through August 27th. Reopening plans, we already talked about phase 1 with opening the offices. Phase 2, a big part of that was tonight with the board approving the reopening plan. Thank you for that. Some of the next steps will be continuing to hire the additional staffing that's needed for the plan, developing those building level and department level protocols, and then registering the students who choose the virtual option by August 12th. The virtual option is developed. We are going to have orientation meetings next week. On August 17th, the elementary meeting will be held at 6 o'clock, and this will all be virtual. And then the middle school, high school meeting will be held at 7 o'clock. We want to make sure families have a very good understanding of what the virtual program will be. And then we continue to try to acquire the equipment that will be needed to start the school year. Some things like additional computers have been on order for a long time. I think we ordered, I think it was close to 2,000 additional computers having to do with the refresh of our one-to-one plan, and then also additional Chromebooks for the elementary schools. Right now, only about 800 of those have shipped, so we are starting to feel the pressure on that a little bit. We've been acquiring additional classroom desks in touring the different buildings. For instance, at the high school, Mrs. Ayler, I was actually in your room the other day, and it's so heartbreaking for me to see the classrooms, how they're set up, and they're set up for all this collaboration with nice big tables and kids facing each other, and it's going to be different this year. It really is. So, you know, we're looking at removing many of those large tables and replacing them with the more traditional desks that probably most of us used when we were coming through. We were actually able to acquire 210 desks from a school district in Minnesota, and I think it cost us like $3 for the entire load. I want to thank DASA Trucking. They have helped us in terms of the delivery of those desks. You know, that is an additional cost, but if you look at the cost per desk, it's the steal of the century, I think. And then the last thing to mention, the WIA came out and issued guidance on July 23rd. Season start dates were delayed. At this point, sports have not been canceled, but I think if you watch the news and see what's happening, I think it's very likely that at the meeting on August 13th, we're probably gonna get some additional direction related to fall sports. That's my COVID-19 report today, and I'm sticking with it.
You know, as far as the computers that haven't shipped yet, you've only received 800. Do we still have any of the old ones, or are they all gone?
We do have other devices in our school district. Many of the devices we had have already been returned per the requirements of the lease. So it's not that we couldn't start school, but we're very hopeful that we'll have the devices which will make starting school easier.
With all of the regulations and lockdowns and things, there are many kids that already have their own devices. If we run short, is it something where the district will be able, I know it'll be a huge burden on Katie and her team in the IT department, but will they be able to help get these kids on their personal devices if we can't get what we need?
We definitely have plans in place, Penny. It is a challenge to allow personal devices into our network. So something like that would probably not be high in our list of mitigation options, but depending on the backlog and what the delay looks like, we could look at a situation like that. We've also talked about, having to prioritize certain situations. The students are gonna be taking the full virtual online program. The computer is even more important for them to get started. So, I'm not trying to cause any panic. There's still, several weeks, but it is coming closer, and I know Katie's really working hard to try to get those devices. They were ordered a long time ago, but as you can imagine, it's kind of like toilet paper back in the spring. So.
And people are used to the Amazon world where you order it one day and get it 2 days later, and if it's 3 days, you're panicking, wondering where it's at.
Well, that's just it. We can't just go on Amazon and order. And I know that's not what you're suggesting, but when we're talking about having devices that are going to be loaded all at once and things, that there's a lot of work to do. Yes.
I think Amy kind of touched on this a little bit too, and this might be getting down into the detail a little bit, but as part of the reopening plan and the typical back-to-school orientation, is there gonna be some orientation on if we hit these numbers, we're gonna go virtual, and this is what to expect, so that we don't have kind of that experience that happened with spring break being off, and then it was kind of a cluster trying to organize and get everybody together. But clearly, I think it'd be a good idea, obviously, to orient kids on this is what may happen, so that when that does or should happen, we're a little more prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was one of the real lessons we learned from the spring was that we need to make sure we're providing those kids with the digital skills that, just checking their email on a regular basis and things like that can make a big difference.
Chris, and then Tanya.
And this is just a minor part of what's going on, but are those orientations going to be recorded so that people can access them if they can't get them at 6 and 7 p.m. For
Yes.
virtual school on the 17th?
Yes.
And then when we do the computers, we're going to try and roll out the computers to make sure those kids that are on a completely online scenario would be able to access their courses. I think that's what I heard you say.
Yes, we're going to have a prioritization plan. Again, a number of students have their own devices where they could get started with. So, we'll be, if we get to that point, we would be asking families to partner with us on that. However, we recognize that the students in that program would need to be prioritized.
And similar, in regards to the specialized programs, Brian, I think in regards to like CDTC and the business management, so they need to be in person, but if we end up going back in person, will the tech work with the school district for these kids, or how will they fulfill those classes?
So the short answer is yes, they're going to be working with us. As far as individual courses, it really does depend on the course. If it's a more lab-based course, then going on site, they have their protocols set in place as well. But they have been in very regular contact with us on what their protocols are.
Super, so then they wouldn't miss out or have to, okay, thank you.
With all the WVS and the grade increase, how's that gonna affect the budget? Because I think we pay for those per course, right?
Yes.
About $300, I don't know what it is now.
Yeah, it'll definitely be a hit on the budget, and that's something we prepared for. But yeah, the more students that take WVS courses, the more expense we're going to have. Like we said at the beginning of this, I would anticipate for the first time in a long time, we're gonna fully spend our budget, perhaps even go into the fund balance. But I think the decisions we made last spring and in previous years have put us in a position that we can handle it for a year.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks, Joe. Let's move on to discussion item 5B, legal services report.
This is a standard report that's shared with the board at this time each year. You can see that spending on legal services is pretty well aligned with what we've seen in the past.
Any questions from the board on that? Chris?
I think that we could get a more detailed breakdown of, I mean, I see that there's payment out to legal services we require, but is there a way we can get a little more broken down in terms of what those services were for in the future? Not for right now, but just to get, so we get a sense of what that service is being used for and then what those costs are for service. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you a little bit, for instance, if we have a student expulsion, that's an expensive process. We have a number of employment issues every year. With 450 employees, there are gonna be some specific situations that we need legal advice on. We also receive policy advice, especially when you look at the School Board Association. But then also, some of the challenges we've had at the board level have definitely racked up some of those costs.
Chris?
And those would be nice to know as well, so we can understand how we're mediating. It is commensurate with what's happened before, but that's still a lot of money. And we should be accountable for where that money's going and why.
Okay. Penny?
The one thing that I would question in it is it shouldn't be super specific, because if we start naming names, then we're running into potential lawsuits, I think, because that should be closed session, so maybe saying a student issue, a staff member issue versus we can't, I don't know legally, I'm not a lawyer, that's why we have these people and that's what we're talking about, but to start naming names in specific situations, we could get ourselves in a whole lot of hot water on that.
I'm kind of chiming in on the same thing. I mean, just maybe it's already entered this way, but if it's like categorized, like your accountant would categorize, like if it's a commercial expense versus a residential expense, that type of thing. So maybe there's like 5 key areas that we have legal expenses or something like that, but just have it listed that way. It shouldn't take that much extra work to data entry it. I don't want to see specifics, obviously.
One thing I will say, Joe, budget was 35,000, we spent a little over 17,000 on legal, so.
Yeah, we try to be cautious with the expenses on that.
Any other questions? Okay, let's move on to item 5C, discussion policy 171.2, agenda preparation and dissemination. Charlie?
I don't think there's a whole lot to add. The paragraph that I put at the top, I think is pretty self-explanatory. That was the purpose for it, and I think it's a good add. Suspect any questions?
Penny?
I would like to say that I love the additions and the breakdown on this. I think that this is maybe something that should have come in many years, probably even prior to me being on the board. If you want to bring an agenda item, let's be prepared and let's go. I think it's pretty outstanding and it gives some requirements and makes it so that all board members will be prepared and ready to go with that potential agenda item.
It does put more onus on the board president to make sure everything's in there. The board president can keep it straight. Chris?
I like it too. Is there any way we can make this like a form that we would just be able to like fill out a little PDF, like anytime you want to propose something to be put on the next agenda, There's a form we just fill out and send it to you and copy Joe.
Certainly should be able to.
We can create an exhibit.
It's a great idea.
I think it's I think it's a terrible idea. I think this is gonna turn the board president, into, I'll say this, the board president is basically can, decide what they want on the agenda and whatnot. Right now, if you want something on the agenda, you can put on the agenda. This is gonna greatly restrict the ability of board members to put things down, put things out there. And, I think this is just a terrible idea. It's just bad. This needs to go away.
Tanya?
Dave, as the board president, do you find it would be helpful to have items more organized for you to be able to distribute properly? What's your feedback, basically, as the president, having to?
Well, I know we had an issue a while back with stuff being on the agenda and where did it come from, what does it mean? I think some background on that would be very helpful. Typically, the board president has an idea of what's going on, but a lot of the other board members don't have that information. I just think this, from a standpoint of keeping the board members informed as far as why it's there and what the intent is and what direction we want to go, I just think it'd be helpful.
Thank you.
Chairman?
I disagree, Jim, in that, I don't believe that this gives the board president any more power to deny an issue or an agenda item, but it requires the person that wants to put it on the agenda to have all their information together so that the other board members, when we get it, it doesn't just say, I want to talk about this, and I have no idea what that means or what the ramifications of that are. So then I have to do a whole bunch of research to try to figure out what it means, and I may be going down the wrong road. A little bit of this information would help me greatly to understand what it is that's being asked.
Jim?
That's why we have discussion items. If you're confused, you ask questions, you listen. I mean, we already are doing this in the meetings. I mean, what you're trying to do is hold a meeting before the meeting and right. We have discussions, this is totally unnecessary and absolutely not needed and very bad direction for this board to go.
Any other feedback from members that haven't spoken? Trish, Amy, Lynn?
I like the idea of a template, put in there about the stuff, but my big concern is, they are discussion items and, and then, I guess some people don't understand or have a hard time, I get that. But, I just want to make sure that things are, if somebody just something to be on the agenda, I want to make sure that, it can be put there, because I'm afraid that, there could be pick and choose because you don't have the right paperwork in, or the right stuff in.
Are there changes, Amy, that you could suggest that would take care of that concern?
I have to think about it. I think having the board president decide, I don't know if that's a good idea or not. And I don't think the president will be. I think it's more up to the full board.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Well, I guess maybe if you stuck in, if the part where it says that the board president decides that there's enough time, maybe just take that out, and just put in there that this documentation is to be submitted by, what's our rule, Thursday? Do we have a normal policy that we use that's there that has a date? And use the date rather than the board president's decision. I also think this is going to be a lot of work for the board president. So the idea here, and I understand Jim and Amy's concern, but correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like the idea is that the board president now becomes the facilitator for helping develop arguments and discussions before they happen on the floor, which is actually a huge responsibility. So maybe minimizing that aspect of it as well, and just make this a form that we fill out, that we get to the board president by a certain date. And if it's requiring more information, that they'll work with the person that's proposing to get the information provided by the next meeting. But when you have a lot of explanation, that starts delineating what it is that your job is and your role in the decision-making process, that leaves room for, I guess, what Amy and Jim are talking about as overreach potentially by the president. So if we minimize that and just use the general protocols that we already have and have a form that goes along with that, with now the proviso being that if there's inadequate information, that the board president will work to provide that information by the next board meeting.
Couple thoughts on what Chris just said. I like a lot, I like what's here, but based on our conversation, which is why we're doing this, I think it's awesome. I think one of the reasons why this is important is because we seem to still have a lot of board members that are receiving information and not sharing it with the whole board prior and wanting different types of items. I think if we eliminated what is the desired outcome of the agenda item, I think that would help clean this up a little bit and open up the conversation. I think if we eliminate that line, what is the desired outcome of the agenda item, and then we can discuss that more. Otherwise, everything else should, and I'm re-scrolling, I read this a couple days ago, everything else should be information. If you're proposing an agenda item, you should be providing that information as well, or asking for additional information from administrators, the district, or have it with you. So I think if we eliminate what is the desired outcome of the agenda item and leave that open, so it is an agenda item, that might help clean that up a little bit. Because what's the description? That's not muddying the waters at all. You know, what is the purpose? Oh, you should have a purpose for why. So that would be the only thing, given the feedback from Chris, Jim, and Amy in trying to kind of lead that should be the only thing that would be a problem in this process.
Thoughts? Charlie?
First of all, the intent was not to make the board president the arbiter of whether it got on the agenda or not. It was more about making the board president being the person who decided, if you will, that the information was there. So it's, as long as the person writes a sentence as to what they wanted to do or what the reason for the discussion was, it's not the board president's job to say that's well written, or I agree with it, or I don't agree with it. It's check, it's there. And then move to the next one, check, it's there, and move on. Not necessarily to be the discussion before the discussion, as Jim put it. So I think, again, I'm gonna go back to, I think it will help us to move along much faster, and we won't come to a board meeting and have a discussion where a third of the board knows and understands what's being discussed, and the other 2/3 have no idea what's being talked about.
One of the interesting things in here is the first paragraph that's in red, the last sentence or so. If the board president decides that there is not enough time for sufficient review by the board prior to the board meeting, the board president will give the proposer, the person who proposed the agenda item, the choice of presenting the item without the additional information or delaying it to the next board meeting. So it's really not the board president making the decision, it's the person who put the agenda item on making that decision. Chris?
I don't have a problem with any of this, but I'm just suggesting they already have a policy that is that we get our agenda items submitted by Thursday at, what's the time, 4 p.m. That unless there's any good reason that it hasn't been working for enough time for people to get that into board docs for us to review, that we should not change that. Everything else I think seems fine, and it would also kind of take care of the problem where that does put just before the decision of the proposer to decide whether or not she or he wants to have it delayed to the next meeting, the decision is already made by the board president as to whether or not there's adequate enough time, which is not specified. So if you just stick with what we already have, which is submitted by Thursday, say 4 p.m., then that takes that added interjection by the board president out of that situation. And if it's already working, why change it?
I think there's some concerns with how it has worked in the past, that's why.
It's a little longer, a little more formal than I would like to see, but I understand why, given some of the stuff that's going on over the last couple of years. Some of it ties back to the board norms about board members sharing information and making sure that we all have the same information. Because certainly, it's hard to have a discussion when we come to the room and I don't know what something's about. Just no description, basically, just one thing on there makes it very difficult to have the discussion. I do think this puts a little more burden on the president, but I don't think it's unbearable. And I do think there's some subjectivity to it, like Chris just brought up as far as that time frame. Like if the board president decides there's not enough time, or the person submitting decides there's not enough time, maybe that needs to be, I don't know how you can make it more objective or clarified.
It says at the top that it has to be presented 5 days or more prior to a board meeting, so that's pretty fun.
But then it goes down at that last sentence in there that you just read off. If the board president.
But then the choice to put it on, that's the information part of the agenda item. So we're just talking about the information part. If there's not enough time to review that information, if the board president feels there's not enough time, then it gives the person who put the agenda item on the choice, do you want it or not? You know, if they want to go ahead with it, then they go ahead. One thing I will say is that it gives me a little more clarification, whoever happens to be president, as far as making sure that all the information they got gets put on about something. Because sometimes you don't know what to put on.
So in my 6 years of being here, I will say that the last year or so, it has become more problematic than it had been. And just last meeting, we had that situation where Amy had requested an agenda item, and I wasn't sure what she wanted on there. I emailed, and she sent some stuff which was put in there, but then we got to the meeting, and then there was additional emails discussed. So then that had to come later. I do think it's really putting some board members at a disadvantage, and I think it's confusing for others, confusing for me, frankly, on some of the items on why they're on the agenda or what the background is supposed to be. I do like the idea of the board president being kind of the gatekeeper. I don't think you want me as a superintendent doing that. I think it's better served by one of the elected officials. But there needs to be some sort of gatekeeper to ensure that the items required for the agenda are present. Because there have been a number of items that we've had in the last year where, you know, items have been requested and there just really hasn't been any background or very minimal background.
The very last sentence actually completely contradicts what the sentence you read about the person being able to decide whether they wanted to have it on the agenda and how. Because it basically says the board president, if in your opinion, the board president, not enough documentation, they can delay putting it on the agenda. It really puts all the power ultimately in the hands of the board president, which just simply is wrong.
I really like it in the fact that I like the organization, I like being able to have all the information that I need in order to have a discussion. I have felt many times that you come to the meeting and not 100% sure what else is going to be discussed and who else has information. So in regards to having an exhibit that organizes those, to know exactly what you need to put in it and for the request, I think would be very helpful for me.
Thanks, Tricia. Chris?
All right, so just to add clarity, no one has any problem with the first part of this, but people have problems with the second part of this. So just so that.
What do you mean as far as
The first part is like how Charlie's put together, organized way in which we're organizing the discussion item. What's there, how it's there, what purposes, that's all, everyone's okay with that. The problem that we have is maybe some of the language that comes in those two paragraphs, and basically it's the second to last paragraph, the last paragraph and the last sentence in paragraph 1 and the last sentence in paragraph 2. And both of those tend to, if they can be read in the way that I'm reading them, give the board president the ability to decide whether or not these things are going to be on the agenda. So it would seem to me that we should just clarify this now 5 days before instead of 4 days before. So now these things have to be done by Wednesday. And if the proposer puts together the outline and submits to you by that date, then that should be good enough to get on the discussion then. The problem is those 2 sentences in each of those paragraphs. So maybe if you just remove those, people would be okay.
The first one gives the power back to the presenter. And just to clarify too, it's been 5 days. What's in black, it hasn't changed, so up above the 5 days. So in the first paragraph where it says the board president decides there's not enough time, then he gives the proposer the choice of presenting it without additional information or delays to next meeting. Charlie?
Chris, I think I understand what you said, and I agree with it in that we weren't intending for it to be, again, qualitative review from the board president. It was, is the information there? Right? So, and when Jim said that the last sentence puts the power in the board president, again, as long as the information is there, that was what I wanted. That's where I went. Not that it was, written in a certain way or anything like that. Just, is it there? So I think we agree.
Any other comments?
I kind of like what Chris said, about the last 2 sentences, the last sentence of each paragraph taken out. But I do like the template idea, so we can figure it out, to put down those things. I think that's important.
So if you take those sentences out though, when someone submits it without the information, what happens?
Can you just put a must in there? For any item to be put on the agenda, the proposer must submit a completed.
But what if they don't?
Well, then it can't go on there.
And who's gonna determine that?
Well, I would assume that, but we should not be able to ask to put something, according to this document, to put something on an agenda if we don't fill out the form. Like, no
Okay.
form, no discussion.
But someone still needs to make that decision.
It gets into a lot of gray areas, all Chris.
No, I don't think anyone disagrees with that. Like, if the person doesn't fill out the form, they can't have the item added to the discussion, and it has to be in by a certain time. And I guess you're saying that you want a sentence in there that allows you to say whether or not the form has been filled out adequately?
That's what's in here right now.
I think that's kind of the way it's been a little bit. Like anytime I've asked to put something on, there's been some back and forth about what we want to do, so I don't see necessarily a problem with that. So they could say the proposer must collaborate with the board president to make sure the form is filled out properly.
I feel like the additions to this policy are just clearing up the gray area that, Chris, you're referencing. And at the end of the day, somebody needs to make a decision, and I feel that it's the duty of the board president, no matter who it is. I don't want our superintendent, whether it's Joe or Steve Smith from down the street, I don't care. It needs to be on the back of the board president to do that. And I feel like this is a good way to just tighten it up a little bit and make it more formal, because there have been issues within the last few years. And if we use this policy and reference policy 165, rule 165, and we bring them all together, that's kind of what we have cohesively here, and I think it makes sense to just say black and white, this is what it is. And I think, I hope that no matter who the board president is, there will still be collaboration with those individuals to make this work cohesively, but now there are some cut and dry rules as to what it looks like.
Ms. Verstead stole my thoughts pretty much. The only thing I've got is, if we have to add verbiage as to the president responding to the submitter as to why they're not going to include something on the agenda. that whole process. So I hate to go down that road, but I don't know if you talk about like a grievance process or something like that, as to why you're not gonna allow something to be on the agenda. I mean, clearly, if they didn't meet all the guidelines, they shouldn't be allowed to be on there, but
Yeah, that is a good point, because in the meeting, for instance, when the chairman is running the meeting, if the chairman makes a ruling and the board disagrees with it, the board can overrule the chairman. So perhaps having some way for the requester to appeal to the entire board could be a solution.
other than community comments or board member comments, bringing it up even though you were denied to be on the agenda. You wanna have a formal outlet for that instead of people just showing up and saying, I wanted this item on here and it's not on here.
I know, from my standpoint, I would think that the board president's job is to try to get, if somebody wants something on the agenda, to make sure that it's there and to get the documentation and stuff needed to make sure it's right. That's the way I look at it, not to restrict. Okay.
And just one more time, the intent was not that the board president would do a qualitative review. Is it there or isn't it? Check, move on. So the board president might totally disagree with what's going on and not want it on the agenda, but if the information is there, that's what we have to do.
Well, just to let the board members know where we're at, so this is just an initial discussion. There could be a first reading at the next board meeting 2 weeks from now, and then approval of a policy change would not occur until the regular meeting in September. So there's plenty of time. I don't know if people wanna draft something up or take this and suggest some changes, or do you wanna keep talking about it tonight?
So is this gonna have to happen for every agenda item? If we come up with some kind of template, and you're looking at, some of our really long agendas, whether it's a board member or the president or the superintendent, everything that goes on, are you gonna have to have that background information then in that sheet?
I think it's for board member suggested agenda items, the way I read it.
Well, it would be good to have background on everything, though, wouldn't it?
It's just general agenda, isn't it?
That should be clarified.
That's a good point, that's a problem.
I agree, Dave, I think that needs to be clarified in there. However, I look back and I think, how often has it been that it's been something that's coming from administration, there hasn't been some clarification or some background information? But I mean, there should be no exception for you versus the rest of us.
So, you guys wanna, Charlie, if you wanna take this and do a little tweaking before our next meeting and bring it back for, if you have suggestions about changes that you'd like made, please email them to Joe. And Joe can, work with Charlie or?
Yeah, please get them to me by Monday, so we have time to put it together. We have the annual meeting coming up too, so it's gonna be very busy the next 2 weeks.
So to be clear, we need to get suggestions on how to amend the document to you.
Me.
And
To Joe, just to Joe,
to get that to you by Monday?
Yes,
a week from today.
Okay.
thank you.
Everybody okay? All right, moving on. Annual seclusion and restraint report.
I appreciate Tony putting this report together. The formatting is a little bit different than previous years based on requirements at the state level. But I guess at this point, I'll just open it up for any questions that people might have.
I have one question regarding the training. 25 staff and 48 in de-escalating strategies. Is that common to train that many people every year, or is that?
I would say that we are ahead of the curve on that by far. And I know coming from some smaller districts, we were lucky to have 1 or 2 people trained. So to have that many people trained in our school district is a real kudos to Tonya and her staff. Tony, do you have anything to add to that?
I would say that number's down because they weren't able to do trainings towards the end of the year. And training next year will look quite differently this coming year, based on having to physically distance. We'll probably train more staff on just de-escalating than some of the other strategies. But we are working with the company who trains our trainers on how to do that safely.
Thank you. Jim?
Do we still use the nonviolent crisis intervention, or have we got a different model now?
Yes, we do, that's what we use.
Yeah, that's what the NVCI,
Crisis management.
Good training. Chris?
Could I get more information on the training? Just, would it be okay that you could send?
Yeah.
That, I would like to learn more about that, sounds good.
Okay, any more questions? All right, item 5E, resolution regarding retirement of Native American mascots, symbols, images, logos, and nicknames in public schools. Amy?
I don't have any, I mean, I think it's a great idea, but, again, I'm the messenger, this just came to me, I guess she thought that, since she sent it to me last year when I was board president, she thought that maybe, we signed that last year, she thought maybe we could do it again. And what I can tell you is that the resolution did not pass at the state level, at the state convention, it was the only one that did not. So she's bringing it back. The one thing that's changed out of this, resolution is that last year there were 31 school districts in the state that still had, Native American mascots. And this year there's 28 because 3 voluntarily removed theirs, so.
Any discussion? Chris?
Was there, I don't remember, the last paragraph being in there, because I don't remember looking at the Act 31 last year for this. Is that part of the new edition? Because if I had thought about it last year in that context, I would have been more convinced that this was something that we have to do in public education. And that it really coincides with what goes on with that state statute. So is that, did anyone else go and look further into that this year and to do that last year? Because I thought that was a really pretty brilliant addition that I don't think was there last time. That might actually help that get passed at a WASB convention. And it brought me at least a little more aware that it's not just that this is a kind of cultural agenda, but this is actually something we have to do by state law. Joe, do you remember anything about that?
no. Sorry.
Well, what she's asking for is, you know, any school board that wants to sign on with this, resolution is what she wants, is what she's asking for. Last year, we did, Eau Claire, several other school districts in the state signed on, and she's just bringing it back again because it didn't pass that time. And now there's been some more information that's come out recently, like I said, now there's 28, only 28 left instead of 31. But also, other things have changed since last year too. The Washington Redskins are, you know, getting rid of their mascot. And also, if you notice, Lining Googles is taking their Indian name out of their products. So there's just been some other things that have happened too that I think people are starting to realize that this is discrimination or could hurt the Native population.
Penny?
I'm gonna stand by, I guess, similar to the comments, I can't remember what I said a year ago, but our district was one that was on the forefront of this long before I was on the board. And we dealt with our community. Obviously, statewide, nationwide, this is being handled, and I guess I don't understand why this is necessary, and why is it our job to police other school districts? They should do what's right. It's not my job to tell them what's right. It's not our district's job to tell them what's right. It's their job to do what's right, like Lining Googles, like the Washington Redskins. And I feel like this is maybe overkill, especially considering that it was shot down by WASB in a 2/3 vote last year. So I don't think that it's necessary. Yes, we did sign on to it. I voted no. I voted against signing on to it because we did what we needed to do in our district, and it's not my job or our district's job to police other districts. So.
Right, well, just to clarify, it wasn't WASB that made the decision, it was the delegates.
Well, yes, no, I apologize. It was at state convention. It was at state convention, so 2/3 of the state 2/3 of the delegates from all of the different districts in the state voted it down, not WASB. Thank you for clarifying. You are correct.
Any other comments? Jim?
Just like to point out that we have students that are Native American. We send them out to other places. And if those other places have logos that are Native American, it's harming our students. And by working statewide to end this, we're actually supporting, telling our students, we got your back. We're concerned about you. We want to make sure that when you go out there, demeaning things aren't happening. So this really is about doing the right thing, one. Two, it's about protecting our students.
Any other comments? Chris?
Jim made the same point last year, and I think they're really good ones too, because when we send our kids out there, a whole lot of harm can be done against the good work that we do in our district, because they could be facing a reality that how they're instructed and how they're taught to think about race and discrimination could suddenly go out the window when they face a reality that suggests that's not that important. The reason I brought up that part about Act 31, because I thought that was a really important part of how we think about ourselves as a state-sponsored institution, and that we're not voting upon what we would do for our district, but based upon what we understand the state guidelines are for how we understand and represent Native Americans in the state of Wisconsin, that according to that kind of level of institutional awareness, I don't see how we cannot support this. It's not about what individual districts are doing for themselves, it's about us being compliant with a whole other level of statutes that we as public educators in the state of Wisconsin are responsible for.
Charlie?
Chris, I wonder if you're getting this in the Act 31 agenda item confused. We can be fully compliant with Act 31 and sign or not sign this particular resolution. Act 31 is about educating the kids on Native culture. So it's two, I guess in my mind anyway, it's two separate things and from my point of view, the time spent on this would be better spent on Act 31. How are we doing on Act 31? What are we doing? Are we exemplary? Those kinds of things. To me, that's more important because we cannot protect the kids from when they watch the Washington football team. Is that what they're calling themselves now? Or baseball teams or whoever or wherever. We can't control that in the rest of the world. So I think it's better, more appropriate for us to think about it from an Act 31 point of view than it is to think about it from this point of view, in my mind, anyway.
Amy, and then Chris.
It's true, Charlie, we may not be able to control what they see outside of there, but, I've written lots of letters and, done a lot of work on this area. And, regardless of whether they listen or not, it sounds like there's some movement, towards that. Something else I mentioned last year when we did this is if Menomonie were still the Indians, and this happened many times because they're a good team and they went to state many times. So they would play the state championship game at Camp Randall. Camp Randall has a rule, no Indian mascots, period. So if they were talking about Menomonie and they were announcing, they would have to say Menomonie team. They would never ever say. So what we're doing is basically making it so that they don't have to worry about saying them. That's one little tiny aspect, but that's, the rule of Camp Randall Stadium. And so to me, it makes sense to do this, just so that they, don't have to worry about,
I think for me, the difference comes down to what our role is as a district, and to me, I'd rather take care of our own business than what we do here in Menomonie, rather than try to tell other districts. We don't know the situations, whether they're, some schools might have a higher population of Indian students or something that we don't know about. They maybe use a mascot or don't. A lot of them, in the original framing of it, I think it was done as act of respect for a lot of these, and I know even in Menomonie, when all this controversy was going on many years ago, there was some with Indian heritage that were very proud of the fact that we had it. Not all, but there were some. Any? Jim?
Just kind of like to note that the person that wrote this is actually native, is actually on the Supreme Court of the Ho-Chunk Nation, right? Yes. So this isn't coming out of the blue from someone, I mean, this is what they want. I mean, we need to respect that. And we respect it by supporting this.
Chris?
Yeah, and Jim would agree with you, Charlie, that Act 31 is a different question about how our educator kids get into school, except for the fact that as a state, we can't make a requirement that we give a Native American education that opens them up to a reflective understanding of what that marginalization means historically, and then also allows certain schools to disrespect them by having state mascots, that use in their American symbols. So that means that those schools that are choosing to do that are not fully compliant with Act 31. See what I mean? And so I get your point, and I do agree that I think we could beef up some of our Act 31 education, especially in the middle school, and making sure that we get a lot of reinforcement of the way in which we think about not just the history, but also the way in which we want to reflect on what the disempowerment means right now. I used to teach up at the Kudere, and it's really one of the greatest experiences of my life in the summertime. And I learned so much from those ladies. And so when I think about what that kind of interactive presence means and how it transformed me and made me understand, about my own, problems that I had with, privilege, it's important. But this is part of that picture, and it really shouldn't take any time at all. It really should be like, yeah, according to Act 31, we're supposed to present education for our students and help them respect the Native American tradition, and those schools that have Native American mascots don't do that. Therefore, they're not compliant, and they should be. So that would be a really quick vote, and then we'd be done with it. We'd sign on with the resolution. I don't want to take any time at all. That would add meaningfully to the way in which that we try to implement, holistically speaking, that idea behind Act 31. Just my opinion.
Charlie?
I guess you folks probably know the writer of this, or you're in contact with her. I'm curious. This, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this would eliminate all Indian logos, all native logos in the state, right?
Correct.
Okay. How are they going to treat the tribal schools? There's more than one tribal school that has a logo that would be in contradiction with this. What are they going to do about that? It seems like that should be covered in here. Just my thought.
Yeah.
I suggest you call Trish Zunker and ask her that question since she wrote it. See what she has to say.
I think as I was going through this, and I was just so overwhelmed by how good DPI is with lots of information they give us. So I was going through with their information, it's like 41 pages, 48 pages on Act 31. And they go over the distinctions between, I think, tribal schools, and especially the tragic history of the way in which that, we have manhandled how we educate our Native peoples. But as my reading of it, and I am not an expert, was that those tribal schools are under a different, this is talking about public, state-owned schools in districts within the state of Wisconsin. And Brian, is that about right, do you think? You've got more experience in Act 31 than all of us in the room.
I'm trying to.
It's a lot for us to get.
There are different guidelines for tribal schools, but I would have to review it.
Okay, you guys want to keep discussing, or bring it back next meeting for, as a action item? We can discuss and vote.
That sounds good.
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay, item F, resolution regarding school district funding to ensure Act 31 compliance. Again, Amy?
Same thing, she sent this along as a resolution, and I know Chris has referred to Act 31 quite a bit, and it has to do with teaching of Native American history in our schools. And, so it's okay, Joe, if I turn around and talk to Zion about that?
Sure.
Just want to make sure. So you probably know more about Act 31 and how it's being used or taught in our schools. So, say what?
You had that in mind.
Okay. So I would like to ask you if you could just tell us a little bit about what Act 31 for our school district, what it looks like.
If I can suggest, if the board would like a report on Act 31, I think that would be appropriate
Or
to
that
give
too.
us some
Yeah.
time to put a report together.
Yeah, I really don't want to put them on the spot, but that would be something that maybe we need to know more about before we make a decision. Sorry about anything.
And I think this might be a good example of the agenda stuff, you know, if the board wants to report on Act 31, we're happy to do that.
So bring it back next meeting again, Jim?
Joe, I was just gonna say, I mean, we're asking for funding for teaching that we're doing. And so obviously the more funding we have, the more effective we can be in the teaching. So I think it's a good idea. I know it would have helped us when we had, the diversity committee, when we put together, had that dance, social education group, would have helped us with funding for that. So I think it's a good idea.
Okay, we'll bring it back again next meeting. Item G, resolution regarding expansion of affordable, accessible broadband in all Wisconsin communities along with school district funding to ensure broadband access for students and staff. Again, Amy?
I think it's a great idea. I've heard from all of us board members that that's really important, especially now in our pandemic where we have lots of virtual school things happening. And I know we promoted it in our letter that we just approved, we sent out to our legislators. So in my mind, I think that's something we can certainly sign on because it affects all of us.
Any other discussion? Okay, we'll bring that back next meeting as well. Item H, next meeting dates. We have our August 24th meeting, which will be at 5 o'clock at the high school. Following that at 6 o'clock, we'll have our annual meeting at the tiered lecture hall. Just so everybody knows, the next meeting is at 5 o'clock at the high school. Jim?
Joe, are you gonna be able to get your COVID report done in 5 minutes next time? Because we have the special meeting that's only an hour.
Is that really a necessary question?
Okay. Anything
I
else?
saw you can't see me smiling, it was just a little levity.
Well, that's the problem, nobody can see.
Yes, here.
Okay, anything else? Motion to adjourn,
So moved.
second.
I'll second that.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.